She thought she was someone because she worked for a rich family. Man, life can be so unfair. I'm Avril, by the way, and I clean toilets for a living. But what can you do when your family is dirt poor and can't afford to let you finish high school? This was the only job I could get without doing something that would get me in trouble or affect my family. And yet, Marissa landed on this big job, and now she won't even acknowledge my existence. We used to be best friends. She comes from a poor family too, but it's not like she'll acknowledge that. She doesn't even speak to her family anymore because she's too ashamed of them. The first time she came to the cafe I work in, I tried to hide, but she saw me and gave me the biggest smirk I've ever seen. I wanted to curl up and die. She even flicked her hair as she walked out. And then she started coming every day. At around 9:30, she'd march in with the 2 kids she looked after and order a whole bunch of stuff. And then, in a loud, fake voice, she'd say stuff like, "Oh, you little darlings, are you excited for Paris this weekend? I certainly am." So I did the next best thing. I spat in her coffee. And then I came up with a plan. I started watching her closely every time she came in and got to learn her little routine. Every morning after her coffee, she'd go to the bathroom. It was always exactly at 10 a.m. And then I remembered she's diabetic and had to take her insulin. One morning at 9:50, after she'd ordered her coffee, I ran to the bathroom and started waxing and polishing the floor. I made sure it was super slippery, and then I quickly came out to watch. To my absolute horror, the little boy stood up and said he needed the toilet and asked Marissa to take him. No, this wasn't supposed to happen. They started walking towards the bathroom, and I went into full-blown panic mode. And then, thankfully, Marissa's phone started ringing, and she ran to get it, and the little boy shouted that he'd go into the boys' bathroom instead on his own. I was so relieved. I actually let out a proper sigh. I watched as the clock ticked towards 10, and then, like clockwork, Marissa got her insulin out her bag and went to the bathroom. Jackpot. Straight away, there was a huge crashing sound, and I almost jumped for joy. Hopefully, she'd have broken her legs, and then she couldn't work, right? I never wanted to see her smug face in this cafe again. But she didn't break her legs. It was much worse than that. I ran in there, and she was lying flat on her back, completely unconscious. Oh, God. What if I'd killed her? The kids started screaming and asked me to call their mom, and then the boy gave me his phone. My gosh, the kids even had their own phones? I called her and asked her to come quick, and then I called an ambulance. There was no one else in the cafe. Even my manager was out running errands, so I quickly ran to Marissa's bag and dropped something inside. When the mom arrived, I couldn't believe it. She looked like a supermodel. She thanked me for calling her and asked if she could call Marissa's mom to let her know what had happened. Before I could even reply, she started digging through Marissa's bag, and that's when she found it. A bag of peanuts. The kids were allergic to peanuts, like majorly allergic, so I'd stuck a bag in there as part of my plan. The mom was horrified and asked the kids if they were okay. Then I asked what was wrong, and said that Marissa always had peanuts and drank almond milk in her cappuccino every day. The mom gasped and grabbed her kids into a big hug. The ambulance finally arrived, and the paramedics were shocked. They said they didn't know when she'd regain consciousness, and so I turned to the kid's mom and said, "Hey, I can look after the kids in the meantime if you want, just until Marissa is back on her feet." Then you won't believe it. The mom looked at me and said, "That girl is going nowhere near my kids ever again. She could have killed them with these peanuts." Okay, when can you start? Then she asked me if I had any experience with kids, and I showed her my portfolio. I'd printed a whole bunch of photos that I'd photoshopped of me and this fake family that I'd made up. She seemed impressed, but then she suddenly looked confused. "But why are you working in this cafe if you have all this experience?" she asked. I told her my family owned the cafe, and then she relaxed a bit. Thank God she offered me the job, because when my manager came back, he fired me on the spot and said he could be sued because of me. But I told him I was about to quit anyway and said, "See you later, loser," as I skipped out of there. I was about to start a new life, and I couldn't wait. I started the very next day, and the minute I approached their house, I thought I was dreaming. It was huge. The kids actually seemed excited to see me, and that first day went well. I had to totally fake it until I made it, but it seemed to work. We hung out by their pool all day, and I taught them some basic swimming skills, and their mom was so impressed when she found out. Then one day, the mom asked me if I could join them on a weekend trip to Paris. Luckily, I'd applied for my passport as soon as I started working for them, because I'd been waiting for this magical moment. So I decided to create a fake social media account. I had to document this. I was going to Paris, for goodness sake. After that, I made sure to wear lots of perfume. By the end of the trip, I had like 1,000 followers on social media. I always filtered out the kids as I didn't want the family finding out I was pretending to be a rich girl. And then I felt like I'd won the lottery. When we got back from the trip, the mom asked me if I'd like to move in with them. I honestly almost hugged her. I asked if her husband would be okay with that, and she said, "Oh, he's always working, so he won't even notice." True, I thought. I'd never even met him. Anyway, when I moved in, I brought 3 suitcases. 2 were filled with old newspapers and stuff I'd found on the street. I didn't want them thinking I only had 1 suitcase of stuff. And my room was amazing. I had a view of the whole city and my own balcony. That first night, I lay there pinching myself. How was this all real? The next day, I noticed my followers had almost tripled, and I had a message from a guy asking me if I was single. My heart started thumping, and I did something crazy. I told him I was going to have a house party that night, and did he want to come and bring some friends? The mom and kids were going to visit their grandma, and she'd asked me to house sit. Of course, I said yes, and as soon as they left, I messaged everyone I knew, including all my followers, and invited them to my party. I started snooping around in the dad's study, and realized he was involved in some kind of illegal business. Interesting, I thought. And oh my God, the party was epic. There must have been at least 100 people there, and I even wore some of the mom's clothes so that I could look all fancy. The guy who asked if I was single came, and he was so hot. At around midnight, I asked everyone to leave in case the cops came, and everyone actually listened to me. No one had ever listened to me before like this. I asked the guy to stay behind, and we started making out on the sofa. I felt like a total queen. Suddenly, though, we heard voices. I thought maybe someone had forgotten something, but then I realized it was a familiar voice. It was Marissa. What was she doing here? I quickly put my clothes back on, and me and the guy dived behind the sofa. Marissa wasn't alone. She was with a man. "See, I told you something was going on. That girl your wife hired is a fraud. And look what she's done to your house. You better call the police." Aw, geez, she was with the dad. But why was she with the dad? And then I heard something disgusting. They were kissing. But I was not surprised. I have seen them do worse things before, and I filmed them, but never showed the video to anyone. "Stop. We can't do this anymore. What if my wife finds out?" the dad said. And then you won't believe it. The mom and kids arrived. I was officially trapped. I was right by the door, and the kids saw me straight away. The mom started screaming at her husband and Marissa. They'd been caught red-handed. But so had I. I stood up, and the guy I was with ran out the door. Then Marissa started shouting at me, saying I'd given her brain damage, and then the mom was screaming at Marissa, and the little boy said, "Oh, I saw Daddy kissing Marissa lots of times before, Mommy." I thought I'd be in deep trouble about the party, and that they'd call the police. Marissa was shouting that I was a fraud, and even played a video of me that she'd got from the cafe, showing how I'd deliberately planted the peanuts and caused her accident. But the mom didn't care. She was more horrified about what her child had said. But then, her husband managed to convince her that nothing was going on between him and Marissa, and he started blaming me for this mess. But just when he was about to fire me and call the police to come and arrest me, I told him that I need to talk to him on the side for a moment. When we went into a separate room, I tried to seduce him, but he wouldn't go for it, and he started yelling at me. But then, I pulled out my phone and I showed him the tape I had of him and Marissa. He was sweating as he looked at my screen. "How do you have this video?" he asked. I was in control now. I told him that if he tries to make any more moves on me, like calling the police, I would leave his wife no place to doubt that he was cheating on her. He started begging me not to do it, but then I told him, "For $1 million, I won't." He quickly said no, but then I was like, "You know what? Let's make it 10 million. He asked me if I was crazy, so I acted like I was about to send it. He realized that he can't refuse, and I left the house without getting punished for what I did, and knowing that $10 million will be waiting in my bank account tomorrow. I guess my message from this story would be that you shouldn't trust anyone. Just because they look or sound innocent doesn't mean they don't have a dark side.
Hey guys, I'm Phoebe, and you'll never guess where I lived last year. In a secret cupboard in the girls' bathroom. Yes, really. Last summer, my parents split up, and it was awful. I went to live with my dad in his new apartment. It was dirty and messy, and there was never any food in the fridge. One day, we had an argument, and he told me that if I didn't like his apartment, then I could get out, so I moved in with my mom instead. But she was living with her new boyfriend in his house. It was okay at first, but soon he started bossing me around like he was my dad. The worst thing was my mom wouldn't back me up. She told me that I should just do what he says. One day at school, I was in the bathroom. It was the end of the day, and I really didn't want to go back to Mom's place. I had been really upset and was putting makeup on to cover it up. That was when I saw a reflection in the mirror behind me and noticed a door I hadn't seen before. I turned around and opened the door. It was an empty cleaning cupboard. It was about the size of a couple of toilet cubicles. I noticed a key hanging inside. The key locked the door. I was curious, so I stepped closer to check it out. But then someone came in and I had to hide fast. So I got inside and hid. A couple of girls came in and no one noticed that I was inside. Then I got an idea. What if I didn't go home that night? I could stay in the cupboard. I texted my mom and said I was spending the night at my dad's. And that night was the first night I spent in the cupboard. I was a bit scared at first, but it was so nice to have somewhere alone without anyone else. I didn't tell anyone, not even my best friend Kimberly, and we usually tell each other everything. The next day at school, I got up early and used the showers at the gym. No one suspected a thing. I went back to my mom's place that night, and her stupid boyfriend started shouting at me straight away. So I told him that he wasn't my real dad and he needed to back off. Well, he got really angry at that, so I packed a bag and I stormed out. I decided I was going to live in the school. I called my mom up and said I was staying with my dad, and Dad thought I was still at Mom's. That night after school, I stole a mattress from the gym, blankets from textiles, and some fairy lights from drama class. I decorated the cupboard and it looked so cool. I hadn't thought about how I'm gonna eat, but I discovered that the school's cafeteria wasn't locked at night. So I snuck in and I ate whatever I wanted for free. Also, I found a key to the vending machines and took loads of chocolate and sodas. The next night, I decided to explore more of the school. I snuck into the staff lounge and looked around. It was pretty boring, really, though they had some nice cookies in there. Then I snuck into the principal's office and found the master key that unlocked all of the staff lockers. I found something shocking. It was a half-open bottle of whiskey in Mr. Taylor, my science teacher's locker, next to some photos of his ex-wife. There is no way he should have that at school. I had a feeling that soon I will start uncovering all of the school's secrets. I only had to make sure no one will find out about mine. One morning, I was hiding in the bathroom sleeping. I woke up really late to the sound of voices in the bathroom. It was two girls from my class, Sophie and Grace. They were talking about a party they had been to the night before. Sophie said that their friend Jen had been showing off the whole night and flirting with all the boys. Jen has really long blonde hair and is one of the most gorgeous girls in this school, but she is so nice. I really doubted she had done anything wrong. I think they were just jealous. Sophie and Grace talked more. Sophie was saying she had done something horrible to get revenge on Jen. But then they started whispering and I missed what they said. Once they left, I got dressed and snuck out of my secret cupboard. Later on, I skipped a couple of classes and decided to go back into the cupboard and see if I could hear more conversations. I didn't hear any gossip, but I heard someone crying. I opened the door a little bit and saw Jen crying. She was brushing her hair and clumps of it were falling out in the sink. I realized what Sophie and Grace had done. They had found a way of making her hair fall out. When they left, I heard more people coming into the bathroom, and I heard more voices. I realized it was boys talking. I froze. Why were there boys in the girls' toilets? Then I realized that the noise wasn't coming from the girls' toilets, it was coming from the other wall. I put my ear against the wall and listened. I could hear Matt talking to his friends. Matt is just the most gorgeous guy I have ever seen, and I had been wanting to ask him out for ages, but I'd been too shy. I could hear him talking about a girl he liked, and how he hoped that she would ask him out. His friends said to him why didn't he ask the girl out first, but he said he wasn't sure if she wanted to go with him or not, so was hoping she would ask him. My heart literally skipped some beats. He must have been talking about me. When they left, it all went quiet, and I realized I was running really late for class. It was science, and Mr. Taylor was not happy with me. He gave me detention for being late. I didn't care, though. It wasn't like I had anywhere else to be. But he could tell that I wasn't bothered, so he started picking on me and mocking me in front of the whole class. I went and I cried in the cupboard. Then I heard Kimberly come in with another girl. They were talking about Matt. Kimberly was saying how she was going to ask him out. I was crushed. I wanted to go out with him, not her. I had to do something to get the upper hand, and I needed to come up with a plan. After school, I had detention, and Mr. Taylor was being so mean to me again. I had no idea why he kept picking on me, but I knew I needed to get my revenge on him. But I had bigger problems to worry about. I had a maths exam the next day, and I had done no revision at all. And I knew if I failed, the teacher, Mrs. Sims, would call my parents, so I spent that evening looking for the answers. I looked in her locker, but there was nothing there. So I went to her classroom and broke into her desk and found them. I took photos on my phone so I could look at them. Then I put them back where I found them and shut the desk. But then I heard something. Footsteps. It was past 11. What was someone doing in the school? The school was pitch black apart from the room I was in, so I turned the light off and I hid under the desk. Then someone came into the room. It was the janitor. He asked who was there, looked around a bit, then left. I waited a couple of minutes, then I left the room. I crept down the hall, then I heard footsteps. He was behind me. He had been waiting to try and catch me. So I started running and I ran to the bathroom and locked myself in the cupboard. I couldn't believe I had almost got caught. I know all of this sounds pretty unbelievable, but my life really had turned this crazy. But this wasn't even the end of the weird stuff that happened to me. The next day I went to my maths exam feeling pretty confident. I'd stayed up most of the night memorizing the answers. It was multiple choice, and I chose mostly right answers and threw in a few mistakes in there so I didn't get 100%. Then I got back to thinking about Matt, and I had a great idea. That night I broke into his locker and looked inside. I wanted to find out more about him, and I did. I found out he was really into tennis. So I went online and bought some tickets for a tennis match, planning to ask him to go with me. How could he say no? I then got another idea. I broke into Jen's locker and looked at her stuff. She had loads of hair care products in there. I took the lid off of one of them. It smelled like chemicals. Had her so-called friends been putting something in her shampoo? I stole the bottle and threw it in the bin. But I still had to get revenge on Mr. Taylor. So I wrote an anonymous note saying that Mr. Taylor was drinking before lessons and had whiskey in his locker. That would teach him not to be so mean. I felt such a sense of power. Living in the school was so good. Then it all started to go really wrong. So I asked Matt out and he agreed to go to the tennis game with me. And I was so happy. But then I told Kimberly and she seemed okay. But later on, I was in the cupboard and I heard her crying in a cubicle. She was so upset. And then it got worse. I heard Matt go into the boys' toilets and he was talking about how he was going to the tennis game with me, even though he didn't fancy me because he wanted to go to the tennis match. How could I have been so stupid? But I couldn't think about that as I had science class. Mr. Taylor wasn't there. We had a supplement teacher. I should have been happy, but I couldn't stop thinking about how I had upset Kimberly. I was a dreadful friend. Then halfway through class, Mr. Taylor came storming in, shouting and swearing. He threatened me and said it was my fault his career was ruined. just assumed it was the correct one, and I was so wrong. Then he told me the worst thing. He had called the police as my breaking and entering counted as a criminal act. And he had called my mom and dad, and they were on their way. So I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. I went to my secret cupboard and locked myself in. I could hear loads of people searching for me, but no one found me. Luckily, I had food and drink, so I hid in the cupboard for a few hours. When it was nighttime, I snuck out. The school was empty, but what was I going to do? There was no way that I was going to end up living with my parents again. So I decided to run away. I packed a bag with my few belongings and I left the school. Then I hitchhiked to a town that was hundreds of miles away, a place where no one would know me. I spent the night on the street, sleeping in a shop doorway like a homeless person. It was cold, dark, and scary. Then I realized I was a homeless person, and I was to blame. I couldn't live like this. So the next day I went to a police station and handed myself in. Luckily, I was let off with a warning. They were more concerned about reuniting me with my mom. That was last summer, and now I'm back living with my mom. She split up with her boyfriend, and now she's living in a really small apartment. My room is tiny. It's no bigger than the cupboard I was sleeping in at school. I miss that cupboard sometimes. At least sneaking out and exploring the school at night gave me some freedom. Now living with my mom, I feel really trapped. Have you ever lived anywhere really weird? Or have you ever eavesdropped and heard some good gossip? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more crazy real-life stories like this one.